Thank you.
About 2005 when it was the PC.
I live in Old Woodley.
Process, there was 3.
Thank you.
I live in Old Woodley. I'm involved with Leeds Civic Trust and a member of their transport group.
Thank you. Stuart?
Good afternoon, Stuart Fillingham, Head of Network for First West Yorkshire and York.
Thank you. Paul?
Hey everybody, I'm Paul Turner, Commercial Director at Transdev.
Thank you. Edwin?
Hi there. My name's Edwin. I'm Head of Service for Mobility Services at the Combined Authority, and I'm filling in for Dave Pearson today.
Thank you. Pete?
Hi, I'm Pete Myers. I'm the Stakeholder Manager for Northern, the train operator.
Thank you. Dominic?
Hi, I'm Dominic Martin, Governance Services Officer. And just to let you know, we are now live streaming. Sorry for the delay in getting that sorted.
It's okay. Thanks for the confirmation, Dominic. Bill? Mr. Timms? Come back. Dwayne?
Hi everyone, Dwayne Wells, Head of Commercial for Arriva Yorkshire.
Thank you. Graham?
Hi, good afternoon. Graham Meikle-John, Head of Regional Development at TransPennine Express.
Thank you. And Mark? I think you're on mute. You're on mute as well, Mark.
Is that better?
It is.
Yeah, apologies with the buttons today. I'm Mark Gregory, and I'm Head of Assets at the property side of the Combined Authority.
Thank you, Mark. And Leslie?
Sorry?
We're just introducing ourselves.
Oh, right. Sorry, I'm just... I'm just tuning in here.
Okay.
No video. Sorry, I'm Les Webb. I'm public representative.
Okay, thank you. Judith, has your sound come back at all? No, it doesn't seem to have. Okay, and as I said before, I'm Councillor Lou Cunningham, Armley Councillor and Armley resident. So welcome to everyone today and thank you for joining us. And for anyone who says it's grim up north, it certainly isn't today, is it? So let's move on through the agenda. So on the first item is for me to ask for any questions from people who are attending or raise any concerns or provide any feedback. Eric? Mark, sorry.
Mark Parry, we're just picking up one or two snippets about the Bus Services Improvement Grant. And just a bit concerned about some of the things we're hearing. The 15-minute frequency is spoken of as a turn up and go service, which most people don't consider that to be the case. And we feel that this, shouldn't really be part of the plan. It should be something more ambitious than that. Well, it's a 10-minute service. Also, I've picked up on that there doesn't seem to be planned a full integrated network review. There's some sort of inference that there's going to be some ad hoc enhancements to the existing network, whereas really I feel there should be a complete review. And I also noticed that there's a target for working towards zero emissions on buses. But again, it's not very ambitious. We're still talking of Euro 6 engines, when surely we should be moving away from them from this point onwards. So I wondered if you had any sort of updates on the way the plans go in, please.
Thank you, Mark. Yes, I'll just hand over to Edwin, please.
Thanks, Councillor Cunningham. You raised a number of really interesting issues. The easiest one to deal with first, I suppose, is the network review or the network plan. So the BSIP that we're working towards at the moment, which we have to submit at the end of this month to government, is a bidding document to try and secure funding so that we can invest in services across the whole West Yorkshire region. As part of the ongoing process we have in sort of aligned to the bus strategy, the new bus strategy that's come out, we're also looking at how we can develop the bus network beyond that bidding document. So that's in the form of an enhanced partnership. So looking how we can work better in partnership with the operators. So we've got the free busser operators or the free key bus operators around the table this afternoon too. And our mayor has also recommended that we investigate the potential for bus franchising. So there's a parallel work stream that's being looked at to look at that element of work. So there's lots of work going on in the space in terms of that network, what the bus network could look like in terms of how we better coordinated it, how we link communities together. And that's an ongoing piece of work at the moment. So it is just the start of a process. It's not the finish of the process. It's start of an evolutionary process for bus services in West Yorkshire. In terms of the core frequency or the core network, I think there was a lot of sort of discussion about what the minimum should be for a core frequency. And I think 15 minutes was the minimum that was seen that you would have as part of that core frequency. And Stuart from First might come in because he's done some work on this and correct me if I've got this wrong. But normally the aspiration is to have at least 4 buses an hour, but aim for higher than that. I'm just trying to think back. What's the last part of the question that you raised, Mark Eric?
It was the move towards zero emissions on buses.
Yeah, so separate to all of these processes, we've got a bid into government, which is called ZEBRA funding, which is zero emission bus funding. And we've got a bid in for that. So we're one of the shortlisted regions for that. And we've got a bid for some electrification of our network as part of that. In terms of the challenges we have with electrification, it's not just about, I suppose we have to get the infrastructure there to support electric buses. We're also I'm not sure if you can remember sort of the VHS Betamax argument. What is the technology that will sort of win out in the end? Whether it will be electric, sort of electric derived, or whether it be hydrogen as a fuel that will be used going forward. And you've got similar sort of debates going on in the rail industry about using alternative fuels. So it's really an emerging space in terms of clean vehicle technology. And we've been quite fortunate. We've got new electric buses in Leeds. And more recently, we launched a service with 7 small electric buses in Leeds too. I didn't know if any of the bus operators wanted to come in and comment on that. I was looking at Paul or Stuart or Dwayne on those points too.
Thank you very much, Edwin. I'll bring Paul in. He's got his hand up at the moment.
Yeah, just to add to Edwin's response, a couple of points. That there was, about 18 months ago, a network review done that basically took the planned housing and employment development over the next 5 or 10 years and identified where the network needs to evolve in there. And I think that's all tied up in the connectivity strategy. It's been a little while since I've been to one of these groups for Leeds, but I think that may have come to this group for information sometime last year. But certainly it's been doing the rounds. So I think we're sort of using the BSIP as a way of trying to develop some of the early wins on that and get a ground for building that up over time. In terms of zero emissions, yeah, I think the main operators have all supported the bid for zero emission buses. Hopefully that will be a success. As ever, it's a competition with I think there's 18 authorities shortlisted around the UK. Hopefully West Yorkshire will have a good chance to win some of those. In terms of why still Euro 6, I think we have to be realistic that zero emission buses are very expensive, and the more we get, the cheaper they become, if that makes sense. But I suppose the other issue is we've got an existing fleet that is of mixed standard. So we have quite a high number of Euro 6 buses in Leeds. Bradford is coming along quite well with its funding in place now for more, but other districts have got less. So we need to try and retrofit as many of the existing buses until such time over the next few years that we can get more zero emission ones in. So I suppose it's a parallel approach, really. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Any further comments, Mark?
No, I've noted that response, thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else like to come in at this stage? Clive?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, 2 points really. First of all, very pleased that there are now £1 fares after 7 p.m. I don't know if that affects all services, but I've been worried for many years about empty buses at night. And so I think that initiative won't cost a lot and ought to bring people onto public transport. However, publicity, I only came across it by chance, and I wondered what plans there are to really make it much more known about, because if people don't know about it, it ain't going to work. So that was the first thing. Second thing concerns cancellations. Last Saturday, I was going to get the 33 bus from Yeadon into Leeds, and the one I was going to get was cancelled, and it meant basically an hour's wait because now it's a 30-minute service. Now, it used to be 20 minutes in 2019, but was cut just before Christmas 2019 to every half an hour. So the bus was cancelled. It was on the Wyka website. I did check on the first website, but there it was just down as a timetable time. So you'd expect them to be the same, I would have thought. So in the time I was waiting to get the later bus, I had a quick look at the, there's a map that Wyka has that shows all the different bus stops throughout Leeds. So there were 8 buses, this was Saturday afternoon, 8 bus services cancelled at that time. And they didn't, some were frequent routes, but a lot weren't of this 8. And then I looked at the frequent routes and a lot of them had no cancellations. Now, if I'm on a 10-minute service, 6 buses an hour or 7 or even 5, then 1 cancellation isn't too bad. But if you're on a 30-minute service and the bus is cancelled, then, you know, that's quite serious. So I just would like, I don't know whether it's a strategy when there are problems. I realise that that's a problem at the moment in terms of driver shortage. Is this monitored? I mean, I think it'd be very useful if we could actually have a database of when buses are cancelled and what route they're on and see any patterns, and that might actually lead to some solutions. But if you're on a 30-minute service, I would have thought it was a priority that you took a driver from another service and didn't make passengers wait an hour, because that isn't going to get people back onto the buses. It's more likely to have the opposite effect. So perhaps we could have, as I say, a database or information. How many cancellations are there? I mean, it's a serious matter if the service is cancelled, in my view. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Clive, and totally agree with you about the pound fares. So it'll be good to hear from the providers about plans to extend the publicity for that. And I'll bring Edwin in now as well.
Thank you, Councillor. In terms of the pound fares, I think that's an initiative that Transdev have undertaken, so I can get people to come in on that shortly. Clive, you mentioned driver shortage, and I'm not sure if you've picked up in the national media, there is currently a national driver shortage, not just for lorry drivers, but for bus drivers and coach drivers too. So all of the operators, bus operators on this call are all experiencing difficulties in terms of drivers and being able to maintain service levels or agreed service levels. And in terms of the case you made around sort of frequencies of service and trying to balance out where there are needs for service reductions, that is something we are working with the operators to do on a pre-planned basis. But on the day, things can change due to sickness and staff availability. And I'll probably bring in Stuart here from First, who can talk about the challenges that First are currently experiencing operating the Leeds network?
Yeah, thank you, Edwin. As again has been experienced across most of the bus industry and some parts of the service sector, there is this nationwide lack of bus drivers, and it's currently placing pressure on a lot of our services. And to mitigate that, we have over a few weeks ago put in some temporary frequency changes on some of our high frequency routes to try and mitigate some of the issues that we've faced and ensure that buses are turning up with more regularity. Like you say, when stuff like this occurs on the day, it does present challenges like Mr. Woods has spoken about. In terms of moving people from one route to another, sometimes there is route learning implications. Not every driver knows all 50, 60 services in Leeds, so that has to be balanced up as well. I will feed back those comments to our Hunslet depot who run the 33, see if we can put more plans in place to ensure that balance occurs. But again, it's a very difficult jigsaw on a daily basis when on the day absences happen. But I will obviously feed that back to the Hunslet team and see if we can do better.
Thanks, Edwin. Thanks, Stuart. And I think picking up on Clive's point, it would probably be good to have some kind of idea whether there are patterns emerging for different services around. I fully appreciate the point about the driver's awareness of each different route as well, but it would be good to see if there are any patterns that are emerging for some of the higher frequency or lower frequency journey patterns. And I think Paul would like to come in as well.
Thank you, Chair. I think just picking up a comment first of all on the cancelled services. We're in a position where we actually have two services that run every 10 minutes in West Yorkshire, one into Leeds, one into Bradford, both of which are currently on a reduced timetable in order to free up drivers so we can try and keep lower frequency services going. The problem is, if we're honest, we're running a little bit on empty at the moment. We normally carry, in a normal time, if a driver fails on an hourly service, we'll normally have a standby driver who can pick it up. At the moment, we've used all those to keep service going. So unfortunately, sometimes things that we would move heaven and earth to keep running, we've just sort of reached the end of the line. If a driver is taking it or fails to turn up or is heavily delayed in traffic, whatever it might be, unfortunately, sometimes the unpalatable decisions of affecting low frequency services are being taken. It's just sadly the situation we're in at the moment with such a shortage. On the positive side, thanks for comments on the £1 fares. We've had them in across our patch since about June, I think it was. They've grown progressively. As they're close to now in terms of revenue terms, covering the costs. So I know Clive's comment about empty buses. They aren't empty, but there are people travelling on them. So the first thing we've done is given them a big discount. The second thing we're doing is trying to get more people back in order to offset the revenue we've lost from those who paid before. We're doing that on the basis it's quite low risk. There's not that many people travelling out there. It is encouraging people back. We're carrying in percentage terms more people compared to pre-COVID in the evening than we are in the day, because the promotions attracted them in. It's how we keep that going in the long term. I think I'd agree with Clive. It is an area that we ought to try and generate more people on when there's capacity. It's just making sure it's sustainable and we keep people for the long term.
Thank you for that, Paul. Clive, is there anything you'd like to come back with before we?
Well, just to say, I think the pound fare applies on First as well. I don't know about Arriva. So if it's the whole area, then really, I don't know, you want to get on Look North and things like that and just make people aware, because if you get people in the evening, perhaps they're going out and want to have a drink, then they're likely to, perhaps if they like the experience, then they're going to start using buses in the daytime as well, we hope. So publicity, please. but I understand the problems with driver shortages. It would be useful, though, to see if there are patterns. I mean, congestion could be a problem. Certainly in our area, it's likely to be a problem, I'm afraid. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Clive. Howard?
To pick up again on the issue of driver shortages, I just wondered what the bus companies are doing to address the problem. Are they taking on apprentices to train up, for example, or are they mainly relying on trying to recruit people who are already trained?
Thank you for that question, Howard. I can see that Paul is wanting to come in on this.
I think the simple answer, we're doing everything we possibly can. The more detailed answer behind that is we've got backlogs of training. So there were spells where we couldn't train and recruit. We've also had some service delays from DVSA, which are getting better. So a provisional license will now land back in the driver's hands within 2 weeks rather than 3 months, which it was at one stage. However, the more complex systems, particularly where driver needs a medical assessment before they, which is basically anybody over the age of 45, that is taking much longer to get back. So we've got across the north of England at the moment, we've got over 90 people in what we call our pipeline, which is people from we have given a job to, and it's taking several months to get them all through. So it's not for the lack of trying, it's just the process has slowed down significantly. And we have obviously the wider sort of labour market issues at the moment, with people who may have taken early retirement, who we have a spate in leavers during the pandemic, as people who perhaps thought, well, maybe I've got used to living on furlough, or they've got used to sort of not having to come into work, so they've taken early retirement. That's peaked. We had spells we took on some coach drivers for a period when coaching was poor. So again, we've churned some of those back out now because they've gone back coaching. A fairly unhelpful approach from government to PCV holders to suggest they train as lorry drivers. That really didn't help. So all the things, it's a bit of a perfect storm, to be honest with you, at the moment in terms of the labour market. However, we've been here before with labour shortages. It's cyclical. It will come good. But rest assured, we are doing everything that we can and continuing to find new ways of attracting people in as we get to it. It's just a much slower process than it was at the moment, sadly.
Thank you, Paul. Stuart, were you wanting to come in as well?
I think Paul eloquently put across some of the challenges that we're facing there very well. We're in the same position with a pipeline of drivers waiting to come through, facing the same sort of challenges. We've also been working with other operators who have pockets of availability. For example, in Leeds, our X26, X27 and 11 service, CT Plus are operating for us on a temporary basis because they had an excess of drivers at that time. So we're looking at other innovative ways with shift patterns and new ways to attract people who have not been attracted to the industry before. So it's a bit of a perfect storm, but we're trying to find a way through it and keep as many services running as we can.
Thank you. I guess linked to that, I'm quite interested to hear about your retention rates in terms of staff. Are you managing, do you generally have good retention rates?
It can depend across locations, to be fair. I haven't got the figures to hand what our attrition is at the moment, but it's obviously higher than it's been pre-pandemic. But we can come back with something on that.
Yeah, I think that
detail, if that helps.
Yeah, thank you. Paul, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I think just similar to Stuart. It's from our perspective, it varies. I think we're struggling a little bit at the moment because we tend to have smaller depots than many. So I've got depots with 40 or 50 drivers in there. If 2 or 3 of those leave, I'm suddenly on the back foot. but so that therefore, yeah, service levels do take a hit. But generally speaking, we have reasonably good retention. It's just peaked at the moment because we had spells during 2020 where we couldn't really recruit in, and therefore it's labour market churn all the time, and it when it's churning in one direction, it takes a while for it to even back out. But yeah, so we're continuing to do manage people to stay in the business as well, and encourage them to stay and understand why they're going. We do exit interviews, all that sort of thing. But at the moment, it's been a struggle, to say the least.
Thank you. Howard, would you like to come back with anything else, or are you happy with those responses?
No, I think that's answered my question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other points to be raised at this stage? Clive? Clive, did you?
Yes, Chair, sorry. Yes, does Wyka keep, back to my cancellations issue, does Wyka keep a record of cancellations? And is that public? I guess that's really, so we know just the extent of the problem.
Edwin, are you able to answer that?
Yes, I can, Councillor. We understand which services shouldn't be operating or which ones should in terms of the pre-planned service reductions or temporary timetable reductions we have. And then the operators will report to us where they've not been able to meet those revised timetable requirements. And so all of that is monitored, not just by ourselves, but it's also monitored because all the districts sort of have punctuality performance plans in place for the services. And I think it's probably easier for the operators to explain how they record the operated trips that they do, because they're always slightly different systems, but records are maintained for services that are run and not run, basically, for all our services in the region. And I didn't know, we've got Dwayne on the calls. I might introduce Dwayne in from Arriva.
And Dwayne has just put his hand up in the nick of time. Would you like to come in, Dwayne?
Yeah, I can do. Clive, just to sort of put into perspective the scale of the challenge, I suppose. At last count, there were 250 driver shortages across West Yorkshire. That's across all bus companies. That's around about 7% of roles. So that just puts into perspective the challenge that we're going through. Now, clearly, we can cover some of those with overtime, and we certainly do that. And as you would expect, we monitor lost mileage on a daily basis. Some days are better than others. We've had a challenge over some weekends, particularly when the weather is nice and less of our drivers want to do overtime, as you'd expect. So it's a real balancing act, but it is certainly something that we're monitoring very closely, and we're reacting to it as best we can by adjusting service levels where we can to ensure that we're not losing mileage. And also, as has been touched on by my colleagues earlier, recruitment campaigns, fast-tracking applications through the DVSA, and making sure that we're getting through as many applicants as we possibly can.
Thank you. Edwin, did you want to come back in on that?
Yes, I did, Councillor. I think the last 18 months have been really challenging for us in the industry. I've worked in the industry for about 30 years in different roles, both in bus companies and in local government, and I've never seen or experienced a period of such pressure or such change. So in terms of the number of changes that we're having to make, we're probably making more service changes, or when we've built services back up, we've probably gone through more change in a few months than we would in a similar number of years. So we've had more change, and it's just been an unprecedented level of change and challenge. And as I think Stuart mentioned, it is the perfect storm in terms of resourcing in the industry for drivers, because there's a combination of factors, and it's all come to a head over the summer in terms of all those pressures have sort of coalesced in the one place, and that's why we're in this position we are now. I think Dwayne was being slightly optimistic with the 7%, because I think we're at roughly about 10% at the moment, some other figures that I've seen. So it's a real challenge, and it's going to be like that for a few months, because it takes time to actually recruit and train up new drivers into the workforce. So once they've got their license and got through their tests, then there's the bit about having to learn how to drive a bus in service and deal with the customer service side. So it's not a very quick like-for-like recruitment or replacement process. It can take a few months before you can get back up to full strength again. So we are expecting a challenging winter. And in terms of my team, which also looks after school transport as well, we know that we haven't got spare capacity. So if there is an issue or challenge, it really is a juggling act trying to match supply to demand in terms of trying to find someone who can cover trips. And one thing I know was briefly touched upon about drivers going to work in the logistics sector. We've had a number of instances where drivers have been offered sign-on bonuses if they go and drive trucks. And so overnight, bus companies have lost staff to provide the resources that they need. And then it takes months for those drivers to be replaced. So it's probably the most challenging I have seen it in 30 years in the industry.
Thank you for that update as well, Edwin. If there are no further comments or questions, we'll move on through the agenda, but just pointing out that people are free to raise comments and questions as we go through, if need be. Right, so agenda item 2, apologies for absence.
We have received apologies from Councillor Groves, Councillor Hayden, Linda Bishop and Brittany Stead.
Thank you. I think Councillor Groves may join us a little bit later. I think she's in a meeting just now. Thank you for that. Do we have any declarations of disclosable pecuniary interests at all? No, moving on. I don't believe we have any items that are exempt from exclusion for press or public. Do we? No, thank you. And we have in the agenda pack the minutes of the meeting that were held on the 15th of March. These minutes are just presented for information for this particular informal meeting. And we also have notes of the informal joint DCSC meeting, which was held on the 26th of August 2021. Again, for note and information. Leslie, did you want to come in there?
Yeah, just to ask, at the very end of those minutes, page 15, it said that there were plans to consult further, especially with people who don't normally get involved in these sort of consultations, about the enhanced bus plan. Where do we stand on that now? I mean, what plans are there for such further consultations, and how will we reach the parts that the other buses can't reach?
Thank you, Leslie. Edwin, are you able to help with that query?
Sorry, Councillor, I just had to unmute myself there. I think having better engagement and community engagement and consultation is something that we do want to do as a combined authority. So I can't give you the details of what our comms and engagement team are planning on that, but it's something I can take back as a question, but it's something that we will try and do. And I think working in sort of this environment highlights why we do need good engagement, because it's been really challenging having to work remotely on Zoom or Teams calls all the time, getting better engagement. So if we looked at the meeting today, we're not engaging with many people who might be working or in education. So there's a whole audience that we do need to engage with, and equality and inclusion and diversity is something that our new Mayor Tracy is very strong on.
Thank you for that. So moving on, we did introductions. Judith, shall we try and see if we can unmute you and you can introduce yourself, because it wasn't working before, was it? No, I'm sorry, we still can't hear you. I noticed that you left and rejoined in that attempt, but sorry about that. So I think the rest of us have all been acquainted on the Zoom. So I'll move on to item 8, which is the Chair's update. Now, a couple of things that I was going to give an overview on, we've already covered, thanks to the questions that have come through from Clive and Mark and Howard. So I'll go through some of the other points that I drew from the information report. I think it's really good to hear about the exciting developments and the and looking forward to the future with hopefully the service improvement plan moving on. I'd be interested to hear more about the Sturton Park and Ride and how that's going now that it's started. Good to hear that that is all zero emission vehicles there. It'd be good to hear how much usage. Also, more about the FlexiBus, the responsive service. I know that's been in operation now for about 3 weeks, so it'd be good to have updates on how that pilot's going. I think my main query for that would be, when can I nab that for West Leeds and have a pilot over here as well? I think that I was just chatting with Edwin before about the use of taxis around my area of Armley at peak times. For example, school run times and things like that seems to be increasing. And I notice more and more on some of our community pages that people are looking for more taxi options. You know, people are always asking, I'm trying to book taxis to get to work at this time. So it'd be good to know just how that responsive service is working. I think it was good to have an update and acknowledge the challenging times in terms of driver shortages. I guess the other things to acknowledge are that passing thanks, because many of those drivers have worked and served us through the pandemic and been at the front face of dealing with people and still maintaining services during that. And obviously I know that we have had a number of drivers who have had COVID and the resulting impacts of that on them and their families. So I think passing thanks for that and acknowledging that it is a really challenging time, because I guess we know that COVID is still around. We know that we're coming into the flu season as well. So we know that there are going to be challenges on the workforce during this time. So I think taking that into account, and maybe it's good to hear more about how those timetables may have to be revised and adjusted as we enter the winter. I appreciate about the recruitment and time taking, but I suppose we're also entering a time where we may have other impacts on services, either through illness, through weather conditions. So it'd be good to hear about those kind of forward projections as well. I think good again to point out that there is the region-wide consultation launched by the Mayor and the Police and Crime Panel. And I think it'd be good for us to feed into that. In terms of some of the feedback that people have given about safety on public transport, maybe potentially thinking about girls and women travelling alone at night, whether those kind of things will impact and are worth feeding back. And I think it was very useful to have an update on the programme of ongoing works, a lot of exciting things going on with the with the packages of improvements around the Corn Exchange and the work to start on New Station Street. My ward is very affected at the moment by the ongoing Connecting Leeds work on the A647, but that seems to be moving along really well, and pleased to say that that the teams involved have been very responsive to issues that have been raised by myself on behalf of my residents. So a thanks goes back to all the teams involved in that. And I think that's it for my update, but happy to take, hope that everyone's had a chance to look at the information report, and happy to take any points or comments that anyone else would like to raise on that. Edwin, did you want to come in? Just
yeah, I'll come in very briefly. I'm happy to talk about the FlexiBus East Leeds service. FlexiBus East Leeds service, we've got first on the call as well. But in terms of the next section, operator updates. I just wondered if you wanted to bring in our rail colleagues in terms of Pete Myers from Northern and Graham from Transpennine Express, because we've heard lots about buses. I'm sure people on the call would like to hear about developments in rail and the challenges of getting people back on the trains too.
Yeah, that's a good point, good move. Do any of our rail colleagues wish to come in at this point?
Sure, I'm happy to. Do you want me to do the operator's update now? Is that? I mean, I'm more than happy to do that. Forgive.
Yeah, I'll just double check. Are there any comments or points that anyone would like to raise from the information report? And if not, then thanks, Pete. We will move on to the operators updates.
Okay. I generally cover 4 or 5 items. First of all, with train service performance, we are operating a good service currently. Performance, we now these days measure what we call time to 3, which is trains arriving within 3 minutes of their scheduled time at all stations, and that's sitting about 88%, which is, in the old days we used to call trace something called passenger performance measure, or PPM, and the equivalent for that would be in the low 90s. So that is good performance, but admittedly we're not running a full timetable. And generally, especially in the peak, our numbers aren't as great as they might be. If I talk about passenger numbers now, it's a strange pattern we're operating to. We are currently sitting at about 75% of our, on average, of those number of people who travelled pre-COVID, but that covers several oddities. The principal one is the strength of the leisure market, which is very, very strong. And currently that's well over 100% of what we would have expected pre-COVID, especially when the weather's nice, and especially obviously on a weekend or a bank holiday. Our peak, our commute is a shadow of what its former self, and that sits at about, well, between 30 and 40% of what we would have expected pre-COVID, and that is substantial. So much so that we are doing a great deal of work advertising and promoting peak travel, which is a thing we would never have done in the past because frankly we didn't need to try and gain people's confidence back for traveling off peak. Clearly the working week has changed for many people, and products being introduced such as a flexible season ticket, which basically is like a carnet of tickets you can purchase with a discount to enable people to travel when they're not traveling to work or to the office every day of the week. It's early days for that. Take up is low, but at 30% you would expect that. And we're working nationally to make that product more attractive and more fitting for the work, the working patterns. Timetable is a timetable. Next change is in December, and the details for that are coming available now. Generally, it follows the pattern we're seeing now. Apart from Leeds, we will see the Halifax Hull return to an hourly service. It's currently every 2 hours. And that is important for east of Leeds. It will certainly help South Milford and Micklefield, Garforth, East Garforth, and so on to get into Leeds. So that is good news there. And that should remain going forward. New trains are all in and operating, and the reliability is now where we would expect them to be. And they're very reliable indeed, which is good news. We aren't suffering the driver and shortage that our friends from the bus industry are seeing. But we do have issues over training, and those issues are because we train a great number of drivers here in West Yorkshire, big old depot in Leeds and Skipton. And for a great period last year, we simply had to suspend that training. And the reason for that was, clearly you can do a lot of training in a classroom, but there comes a point when the individual actually physically has to drive a train. And it's probably best we don't just let them do that on their own. So we normally have someone in the cab with them, and driving cabs are small, and it's impossible to physically socially isolate in a driving cab. Great deal of work was done by the trades union and our people at the turn of the year, and training did start in the very early spring and has continued throughout. People testing and bubbles forming, training bubbles forming. Those needs have gone away, and we are certainly making hay while the sun shines now. We're training a lot of people, but that hiatus for training is with us, and that is one of the reasons we can't return to a full timetable as things stand now, because we have this backlog of training for all sorts of reasons throughout the business. So that is an issue for us. Other than that, I think we carry on. The fuel shortage everybody saw, we also didn't affect Northern. At Neville Hill, our big depot, it's delivered by rail on a rail tanker, so we had no issues there. Other depots where it does come in by road tankers, there wasn't an issue, and we're getting the diesel we need. We did see problems with our cleaning teams where they couldn't get petrol and diesel for their vans, and so some stations missed their cleans. But thankfully, that seems to be behind us now, and everything seems to be a lot better than it was. Lastly, just some good news, I think anyway, and that is Neville Hill depot east of Leeds, a vital piece of infrastructure for the health of the railway in the north. For many years, it was kind of co-owned between ourselves and our friends from East Midlands Railway. That now we are coming together. We're coming together under one unit, under Northern, and that happens actually next Monday, but it's terrific news. And initially, we won't see any change because the people will chuppy across and do what they're doing. But the opportunities that gives us for the future are immense. And we look forward to working with our friends out there to make Neville Hill more efficient, but also to make chances of training young people to come into the rail industry and especially on the engineering side are terrific. So lots of work going on up at Neville Hill, and the transfer happens next Monday. For Northern, that's really my report. Happy to take any questions or wait for Graham to do his bit and take them then.
Thank you, Pete. I think Judith would like to try and unmute and ask a question. It's still not working, Judith, I'm afraid. If you want to type your question in the comments, I can raise it for you. Leslie, would you like to come in? Leslie, you're also on mute at the moment.
I clicked it, but it didn't work. Yeah, I was saying, I hope, in view of what Pete says about the changing passenger traffic on Northern, the opportunity might be found to try to encourage cycle rail travel more, both for leisure and also for a certain amount for commuting. The 2 bikes per train rule has been with us for many years now, and it could be that with slightly lighter commuter loads, Northern could look at easing that a bit. And certainly for leisure travel, as Pete says, the numbers seem to be up again, which is gratifying. Again, cycle rail leisure travel is healthy, efficient, sustainable, all the good things. So I'm just sort of encouraging Northern to think positively about this.
We do indeed. I mean, our rule is 2 bikes per train, more at the discretion of the conductor. Clearly, if the train is not full, the discretion of the conductor is more easily. They will use it, exercise it, and we will carry more cycles. And so for the commute, that's probably very true, and that's certainly happening. Leisure is a different matter, isn't it? Because those trains are jolly busy, and well, they still are. We had a very busy weekend this weekend, and on the leisure routes especially. So up into the Dales, the Yorkshire coast, very, very busy, and all those routes. So I think 2 would probably be as much as we could push it to in those cases. But you know, as you're absolutely right. It is something that, as an industry, we need to look at, especially on routes like those into this up into the Dales, where the demand certainly outstrips supply often. But again, I mean, again up onto the Southern Carolina line, I've known 10 bikes carried quite easily in the past, or maybe not easily, but they've certainly got on.
They get on.
Thank you. Anyone else? Any further questions or comments? Oh, I think Judith's question has come through. Excuse me whilst I just access it. I've taken a few train journeys recently and have felt very unsafe on trains across several companies on account of the low level of mask wearing, notices and announcements to ask people to wear masks, but then say we realise that not everybody can. Whilst this is a good policy, I think it's a mistake to announce it, as it gives people carte blanche not to. I can't believe that 90% of passengers on some journeys are unable to wear masks.
Indeed, that's true. But people do not, we can't enforce it because people do not have to wear masks. It's the same in shops and everywhere else. And the numbers who do wear them is certainly falling, or are certainly falling. But we do, our message is we do ask people to wear them and out of respect for their fellow passengers. But if they choose not to, we can't. There is very little we can do about it.
Thank you. And Judith says, but on trains, you're often in a sealed tube for an hour or so, unlike shops.
You are indeed. You are indeed. We do all our train. We do run with the windows open. That is what we do, and lots of our trains, the windows will open, which is a good thing. And those where they won't, we have ventilation through the train, which is operating all the time.
That's right, and I think that even in London, where there is the mandate for face covering, I think there's still very little follow-up in terms of how things are policed and checked there. So Judith is just saying, all I'm saying is don't be so forthcoming with your tolerance. Be tolerant. Just don't tell everybody that you are.
Well, indeed. I mean, and in fairness to Judith, this is a common comment that I hear. It is difficult because they are no longer mandated. It hasn't been since July, and people are getting more and more used to not wearing them, to be honest, and are not doing so.
Thank you. Graham, would you like to come in at this point?
Thank you, Chair. I'll look to be brief because Pete's basically stolen all of the best lines, so I won't repeat, but I will endorse comments that Pete's making. And I'll start off with performance as well, where equally we're in a good place. The T-3 metric that Pete outlined, we're around about 84%. and compared to a range of other train operators, we're I think in the upper end of the table, or the league table, you could look at it, which is certainly a good position to be in, but it's not one that we're complacent about. The new National Rail contract that we're under, he mentioned the public performance measure, which was basically within 10 minutes at end destination. We're now measured for performance at every calling point on the journey, either on time, within 3 minutes or within 15 minutes. And that's enabling a lot of good analytical data to be produced and analysed. It's a different contractual structure with the Department of Transport and their own partnership, but we're eager to maintain what is a good level of performance on our services into the autumn period, when the performance historically does dip for all railway operators just because of the weather and other issues, into the winter, so we can bank a solid period of data of good performance that can then take us into the next year, and hopefully see that sustained, not just for us, but for Northern and for the other operators as well. Our passenger numbers are recovering. We're around about 70% of where we were on pre-COVID levels. What that figure doesn't reveal is where we are actually above where we were pre-COVID, so over 100% on some routes. And that's essentially been driven by a leisure-based recovery. Some of the trains at the weekend are very busy, as people understandably want to reconnect, they want to travel, they want to see people, do things and all of that. But right across the rail industry, we are incredibly busy at the weekend. And as people's outlining, the commuting pattern is picking up, but it's very much a new pattern of how people are travelling. So I think gone are certainly the number of trains in the 1 hour peak in the morning that were very busy going into Leeds. It's more staggered. But then you are seeing the sort of return home between 4 p.m. and 6 p.m. Where there are busier services, and that's a combination of people who are working in the office or retail or whatever, and coming back, along with people who have travelled out for leisure purposes for the day, heading back to get home around at the same time. So the trends are there and encouraging, but we just need to continually heading in the same direction. Timetabling matters. The next timetable change will be December for the winter timetable change. That we know sort of major changes at all to what we're operating to and from Leeds and the stations that we operate in West Yorkshire. The through change that you will see is we're now bringing back the sort of Scarborough to Manchester or Liverpool service as a through service, so sort of extended connectivity day out to the coast, if that's what you're looking for. But no other fundamental changes to your services that we're operating. I think I always say I can't attend a meeting without talking about toilets, and I believe our builders, our contractors at Dewsbury, have finished installing both male-female toilets and a changing place facility at that station. So there will be a process to go through, but that'll be a good facility for customers to use. Long overdue having such a facility installed, so we're pleased to have been able to make that happen. Hugely complicated trying to do it in COVID, but we got there in the end, and credit to the contractors involved in that. Judith raised a point about face coverings. I just would like to make an observation that I think because of the messaging we have in England is different. We operate services in Scotland where it still remains a legal requirement to wear a face covering whilst on public transport, and we're around about 70% of customers on board our services in Scotland wearing face coverings. In England, it's around about 30%. And I think there's something there in the messaging that people have. Clearly, if you're being told you don't need to wear a face covering on board, then people don't, and they don't react to the messages being given. But it is very much about giving people confidence to travel in comfort. And that's certainly something all train operators are looking at to make sure as part of the return to rail travel we're catering for people who are understandably nervous and anxious maybe, and those who are quite oblivious and don't recognise those issues, just to have a more respect for everybody to be aware of others' sensitivities going forward. And that's the main update for us. So if there's any questions, I'll be happy to take them. Thank you.
Thank you, Graham. Graham, I'm interested to know that you said that you're back to 70%, and would you say then that the commuting times are pretty similar to pre-COVID? Just that I've noticed in terms of car use, the time seemed to be a bit later on the roads, the busier times. But I just wondered what you were finding in your patterns of return on the trains.
I think it's very much staggered over the course of the day, because, for example, I've got Clarence Tower behind me. I'm here in York, so if I'm in York Station, I can see trends of travel. And if you're travelling to Manchester, I would say that the train's lighter. But if you're doing a journey towards Leeds, it's a busier. But I think it's a mix between those who are travelling to the office for a certain time, those who are travelling maybe for the retail sector at a particular time, construction sector and others, but also those who are heading off for academic purposes as well. So it's a more spread trend than, say, traditionally people would be somewhere for 8:30 in the morning, but it definitely seems to be building, and our staff are reporting familiar faces being for a number of days in the week, but we're certainly not where we had people regularly commuting the same journey, the same train journeys, 4 or 5 days a week.
Thank you, that's interesting. Leslie, would you like to come in with a question?
Yeah, Graham, I'm sure will be aware that we're still getting a lot of complaints about the bicycle facilities on Nova 1 services. There's a very long-standing problem, and we're getting, of course, in particular, complaints from women who find that they may not be strong enough to lift their bikes up onto the hooks in the Nova 1s. Now, I'm just wondering whether Graham's got any ideas about whether we can, some sort of short-term fix. Are there any other places on the Nova 1 where one might contemplate putting a bike? Obviously you must see this in action. I just wonder whether you've got any observations on the point.
Well, the Nova 1 trains that we have are the same trains that you have for LNER,
yeah, indeed.
Consumers, and also Great Western. They operate them as well. Yeah. And Hull Trains, they've got the fleet as well, and the new open access operator Lumo have them as well. So there's certainly a common fleet throughout the train. I mean, certainly if there are people who have difficulties, then assistance can be provided to help people on and off trains and lifting up and all of that. But I think in terms of other places in the trains are designed specifically with these carriages in place for bikes to be stored. And I think it's an ongoing issue in terms of providing the right amount of space on the train for the different needs for all the users. And it's a metal tube with a defined space, and if you take something out and you make more space for something else, and you begin to lose space for other aspects, and that has to be looked at. So certainly the space that we have is accommodated, is consistent with the rest of the rail operation. But as I said, if anyone does have any issues boarding, then assistance can be provided, and our staff will be happy to help.
Yeah, it is an industry problem, I do realise, and I know that TransPennine are working with the other companies to try to find a solution in the slightly longer term. But in the meantime, I don't think a lot of users are getting the help you describe. Even with help, it's almost impossible to get the bike located. However, as I say, it's a longer term problem. I just wonder whether Graham had any ideas about a shorter term fix.
Thank you. Shall we move on to Stuart, please, your update?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just once again, I think we covered the industry driver shortage at the beginning, and I'd just like to thank all elected members, public representatives and our customers for their understanding while we overcome this short-term situation. And I hope today's given you some confidence that there are plans in place to get us back to a higher level of service. Just in terms of customer numbers, we're still around that 70 to 75% ballpark, depending on area of Leeds. We've also seen the universities return over the last couple of weeks, and understandably they're still on some form of blended online and physical learning, which may change as the term evolves. So we're watching that with great interest to see what patterns evolve there. In positive news as well, it's worth noting that we've had the successful integration of the Sturton Park and Ride and East Leeds Flexibus into our operation at Hunslet Park, both obviously using electric vehicles, and great teamwork and collaboration between the Leeds City Council, West Yorkshire Combined Authority and ourselves to get these mobilised in good time. And the numbers at Sturton are growing week by week. Obviously, I'll provide a bit more of a breakdown about that if needed. Encouraging growth on East Leeds DRT. Still early days yet, but really good feedback from customers so far. I even tried it myself this morning. Turned up bang on time. Very friendly driver and got me to where I needed to be. In terms of LP tip works, we've been working with West Yorkshire Combined Authority to improve bus stop information at the Corn Exchange, and note that the City Square consultation is still underway, so we're working on that. In terms of service changes themselves, nothing planned in the short term. Obviously, we're still trying to work on a roadmap out of the current staffing situation, which obviously consult with West Yorkshire Combined Authority colleagues when we're in a position to start putting services back up to these temporary frequencies, which is the plan, and we will work tirelessly to do that. We are starting to feel the creak of lateness, specifically in Leeds on an afternoon, and that's to do with the number of roadworks going on and the change in demand. We're finding that our afternoon peak over the last 2 or 3 weeks has become very, very acute. So we're working on some punctuality improvement plans with an aim to bring them in as soon as we can to ensure that the service runs more reliably. And I think that really covers it for us at first at the moment. So happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Stuart. I can see that Mark has his hand raised. So would you like to come in with your query, Mark?
Yeah, I was just interested in the DRT Flexibus. As I always thought of it as operating where demand is very low, sort of low population out in rural areas and in the evenings as well. But I'm just interested why East Leeds, Monday to Saturday daytime. Is this not going to detract from the normal bus passenger numbers?
In terms of the scope of the project, unfortunately, I wasn't too involved in that detail, but I'm sure Edwin might be able to assist gladly with that question.
Okay, Stuart, I'll try and answer that as best I can. So it's a research trial project that we've started, and hopefully it will lay the groundwork for us being able to run other projects in both urban and rural areas across the region. It is an urban area, and part of the reason for that was there was some potential for third-party funding to help promote the service there and fund that service. So some of the funding and the development in those areas linked to where the service would be. Part of the rationale behind the service is that it complements and connects in with other public transport services. So it is possible to connect in with a train service or another bus service to make your journey. And we've worked with First to provide free ticketing and arrangement. And we've got the M-Card products are available on the service. So you can use your M-Card product. And an M-Card is a ticket that enables you to use all buses and trains within West Yorkshire, potentially. So we've got that integrated ticketing proposal there. It's a really new concept for us. We haven't done anything like this before. And as I stressed at the start, it is a research project for us. So it's an experiment, something we can learn from and then look to roll out in other areas depending on how successful it is. but we understand that DRT does have particular applications for areas with low demand, and they may be rural areas. But one of the things we want to do with the DRT service is look to see if we can get people out of cars and using something that might be more suited to their needs, where a traditional bus service might not work for them. So it's really trying to test a number of different concepts and try something out that's a little bit different. And we're really pleased that we've had really good support from officers at Leeds City Council, and also with our first the vehicles manufactured across the Pennines by Millers, who are based in Lancashire, and it's been really good that we've been able to work with local communities to try and sort of get the service running. Well, it is running. I shouldn't say try, because we are running. It's in week 3 of operation as of today. The numbers have built up from week 1. So I think on Friday we had over 40 trips booked on the service. So it's growing, and it's getting that learning and understanding that's really important for us. And I know we've got Councillor Groves on the call as well, and she's heavily involved in our BSIP work and the BSIP bid that we're going to submit. Part of that BSIP work does look at the potential for other schemes across the region and in the other districts.
Thank you for that update, Edwin. Mark, is there anything you want?
Thanks for that.
Thank you. Is there anything you wanted to add, Councillor Groves, at all?
It's a really early model, and Mark, the model that we've looked at was the Arriva Click model in Liverpool, which services their rail station and was more around professional people getting across the city. This is a totally different model. It's operating in Cross Green, where, as we all know, Leeds. You think about York Road and the volume of buses that go down there, but for years Cross Green has been totally cut off, and people have felt isolated, especially people who will struggle with their mobility. I think for these models to work, that they have to be linked to either an employment zone or an anchor organisation. So it was really key that this went to St James's Hospital. It's quite an expensive model to run, but we have to try and make it work, because I do think more of these demand responsive transport or flexibus is what's needed in the future to fill in those gaps in the network where those buses have disappeared. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Councillor Grove. And I agree, even in my own ward of Armley, which is so near the city centre, we did have some MIDI buses going around certain routes on certain estates that people did use for those connecting journeys to go to the GPs and to go to places where they now rely on taxis, where there's a constant stream, as I've said, on lots of our estates around in Armley. Thank you for that. Any other comments or questions?
Yeah, I was going to ask about the effect of roadworks, and that was mentioned in the report. And certainly, I think it's better now, but there were considerable numbers of roadworks on main roads, and often nothing was happening. So I just wondered, I guess it's a highways issue. I know in some areas, apparently, utility companies are charged, have to pay a rent for closing a road, or putting in temporary traffic lights, I should say, really. And I don't know whether Leeds does this, but that apparently makes the roadworks take, be much shorter time. I mean, certainly at weekends, nothing's done, and yet the lights are there and the hold-ups are there. And it certainly doesn't help bus services. And I was stuck for 20 minutes a couple of weeks ago, just because of an instance of roadworks that weren't actually, nothing was happening.
Yeah, I think for some of the main schemes, a lot of the lights are in place all the time, even when the works aren't happening. But that would be a highways issue for us to raise with them for any, real ongoing works. Any other comments on that?
Can we raise it with highways then? Perhaps at the next meeting they could come and tell us just what they do and how it operates, and how we can make it less disruptive.
Yes, I can ask for someone from Highways to join us at one of our future meetings. Thank you. Did you want to come in, Councillor Groves? No? Oh, I thought...
Yeah, I think Councillor Cunningham, I know it's your first meeting. I think that would be really useful, because they could also talk about the 173 million, all these bus priority corridors that have gone out, and also what the challenges they're facing with supply chains as well, that I think most industries are facing. So I think it would be good for you to get Gareth Bartlett to come along.
Okay.
Yeah, some of the interesting things that I've been getting fed back is that where the bus priority corridors have gone in, people travelling who it's taken 40 minutes, it's now down to 15 minutes for them on those new corridors. So some good stories, as well as the one we've just heard, which is not good. So yeah, I'll leave that one with you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Dwayne, would you like to come in with an update from your service?
I certainly can, yes. So as those of you who know me, I do try and put an update together that's a positive update, because there's lots of good news to share. My update today is first with a negative and then with a positive. I wanted to start off by raising an issue that's been troubling us, really, and something that is going to impact the comfort, resilience and reliability of a lot of our core bus routes. And it's going to adversely impact about 1.2 million passengers every year. And that's the scheme that's being proposed for Crown Point Road. For those of you that don't know, this is our main route into the city from South Leeds, from Rothwell, Woodlesford and further afield. And there are plans afoot to turn that into a single lane with a reduction in bus stops and reduced to 20 miles an hour with speed humps that would jolt bus passengers. And needless to say, it's something that we've objected to. And the reason for raising it with you today is that we do have an imminent decision that we need to make. And whichever option we choose, we know that residents will raise concerns with yourselves. So really that's just to provide some advance notice there that we do have a challenge as to whether we continue to use that existing route or divert. In other news and to the positive, I'm pleased to report some really encouraging growth on some of our services. So we changed our network in July, doubling the frequency of one of our services that passes Woodlesford Station. And I'm very pleased to report that that's seen some very encouraging growth in usage, not only to Woodlesford, but also to Rothwell, as it creates better links there as well. And more generally speaking, across the network, as we recover from the pandemic, we're back to around about 76% of our pre-pandemic patronage. I've just checked the data for yesterday and been very surprised. It's 85% of pre-pandemic passengers that we had back yesterday. So a good strong weekend for us, which is really encouraging. And happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Dwayne. Any questions or comments? Thank you. I've just had a note that the Crown Point issue is being raised with the leader of the council and chief executive as well. So thank you for that, Councillor Groves. No further comments. Over to you then, Paul. Thank you.
Thanks for that. I think, yeah, on a similar basis to others, we're about 70% in Leeds of customer numbers, which is lagging a little bit behind some of our other networks across the north. But then we do run to an airport and we do run a motorway commuter express, two markets of which are a bit more affected than others. If we want to be really positive, that's about 40% more people than were travelling this time last year. Every week the numbers creep up a little bit, so there are signs of recovery. As we touched on earlier, we've had the £1 fare to try and stimulate evening travel, and we thought that's sort of trying to align to getting back the hospitality market. I think similar to Dwayne's alluded to, weekends generally quite good, higher than weekdays. unless it rains, in which case the numbers plummet. So we've seen quite a bit more weather exposed when you look at things on a day-to-day variation than the past. That sort of 70% masks a few variances. So young people are almost travelling in the same quantities as they were before COVID, with degrees of variation. I think Stuart alluded to the university sector of the market isn't quite recovered yet, but certainly the school age students appear to be. Those travelling on concessionary passes are travelling below average, and therefore sort of the fare paying section in between is pretty much on average. So again, nothing particularly dissimilar to the rest of the industry in that. Cities such as Leeds are recovering a bit slower than smaller towns such as the Keithleys, Burnleys of our network, and I think that primarily reflects the fact that there are probably more jobs in Leeds that people can do from home than there are in some of our smaller towns. So a bit like the rail colleagues, we're looking to try and encourage people when they come back by bus. There's better ticketing choices out there, both on our air ranges and also on the MCAR platform, where you can get effectively discounts for regular, if not daily, travel. So you can buy tickets in bundles of 3s, 5s, and 10s and things like that. Again, these are not in mass use yet. They're out there, but there is the sort of the reassuring people are buying season tickets again, which always makes us slightly more relaxed in things, because we know where people are sort of coming back and trusting the bus as regular use on there. I think somebody asked the question about roadworks before. Roadworks are always challenging for operators because we can't complain too loudly, because sometimes we benefit from the outcomes. So there's a phase of can't make an omelette without breaking eggs on there. And obviously there's a huge amount of investment going on in Leeds, which we welcome, and we look forward to the benefits of this for our customers in terms of good journey times and predictabilities. And obviously that does create swathes of disruption while it's happening, but that's something we live with, and we try and sort of flex schedules to maintain that. I think that's pretty much it from us. One more thing in terms of service. We've got 2 routes into Leeds at the moment. We're running on a reduced frequency. Everything else is back to what it normally is, and we hope to get those 2 back just as soon as we get that little matter of the driver shortage resolved. There's nothing to stop those going back to normal, other than the fact we can't at the moment get enough drivers in there. So as soon as that happens, they'll be back to full strength, and hopefully we can carry on seeing some growing numbers. It's quite nice to be talking about the bus as a growth industry after all these years. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Paul. Thanks to everyone. Any questions or comments for Paul from? Edwin, can I bring you in, please?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. It's not a question for Paul, but I know I'm aware that there are some investments in the rail network taking place in the run up to Christmas, and I didn't know if I could get either Pete or Graham just to talk about the planned works that will take place in the run up to Christmas.
Yeah, sure. It's mostly over Christmas, actually. There are planned closures of Leeds Station as part of the preparatory work for the Transpennine route upgrade works, which will be with us for a number of years. And what we'll see at Leeds Station is some significant closures over the Christmas period, and indeed 1 or 2 on the lead up to Christmas, but these are more constrained. However, it's nothing we haven't handled before, and the planning for it has been in train now for a long period. We're not expecting any significant passenger issued. We will certainly be well promoting, advertising the fact that these closures happen. We had almost the same closure at the May bank holiday, which served as an excellent learning experience, and we used that. So we're using, for example, Kirkstall Forge as an interchange from the trains to Ilkley and Skipton, and that worked very well, and we'll be doing that again. It's a great place to change. It's dry, it has catering, and the buses can get in and out very easily, and then down Kirkstall Road into Leeds. So yes, there are some engineering works coming up, and there will be the precursor of a great deal of work, which will be the Trans-Pennine route upgrade, which will happen over the next few years.
Thank you. That's really useful information, Pete. And thanks for all of the operators for their updates. And we look forward to the numbers increasing by the time we have our next meeting as well. Thank you. So shall we move on now to our workshop session, agenda item number 11. I'll hand you over to Edwin. Thank you.
If you can bear with me, I'll just try and have to get the presentation back up and share my screen, Councillor. So it might take a minute or two, depending on technology.
Thank you.
Edwin, I can share that if it'd be helpful.
If you can, Dominic, that would be a great help. It's just not wanting to work on mine at the moment.
No problem.
Talk through the slides. Thanks, Dominic.
No problem. 1 second.
Okay. Lovely. Can everyone see the screen okay that Dominic is sharing? I take it silence is good, so everyone can see it. So these slides will be shared with everyone after the meeting. So if you haven't seen them before, and don't worry about having to scribble down notes and things, we will share them with you. And the purpose of the session, really, if we just read this through, is thinking about what's happened during the periods of lockdown and the pandemic, and how transport is going to recover as we move out of that in terms of the long-term impact on travel behaviours. And there were three sort of questions that we had that we wanted to go through today in terms of the workshop. So as we move through the slides, there'll be various bits of data and things that we can share with you. And what we wanted to get from you on the call is really thinking about how COVID has changed your travel habits and the perception of safety. What needs to happen to enable transport to support an economically sustainable recovery? And how do we ensure transport options enable the widest range of people to be included in society? So thinking of that inclusive transport offer that we'd like our public transport system to make. So if we could just move on to the next slide. And I'm not sure how easy these are to read because I find the graphs a bit busy as well. But I think if you start, we'll look at the one on the right hand side there, which is about weekly bus patronage. And you can see how it goes up and it goes down, but we're not back at the levels we were pre-pandemic. So we've had the operators talking today about we're back to about 70%. We had a really good weekend and we got back up to 80%. We're not at 100%. And I think the work that we've done with government so far indicates that actually we might get back to the 80% in the spring of next year. But there's lots of unknowns and uncertainties in there. So we've got other data sets that sort of support that. And then I think the interesting one is I'm not sure how clearly you can see that in terms of reading that graph, but it's about traffic levels have recovered quite strongly in terms of the road network. And I know anecdotally and from other calls I do with Leeds offices that demand on the road network has increased, and people have switched from using public transport to cars during the pandemic and the lockdown period. So it's how do we sort of adjust those travel behaviours back again? Okay, so we want to move on to the next slide, please. We've been undertaking some surveys on a regular basis and trying to understand what residents in West Yorkshire think in terms of their travel patterns and what they might do in terms of in the future. And I think I'm not sure how clearly it comes across, but travel by bus in terms of the people who respond and travel by train, they've dropped down in terms of less likely to use those modes in future based on their current experience. And I think it might not seem a lot, but 19% say they will use buses less and 17% they will use trains less in the long term. So that's quite significant when you think about it. And I expect many of you would have seen the vans whizzing around delivering things in terms of shopping that you might have traditionally gone and done yourself. But travel patterns have changed, working patterns have changed too. I know from our own organisation, it's something we haven't yet sort of about too strongly in the sense that our offices are currently being refurbished, so we can't use them. But how do we go back into an office environment and work? And one of the questions, I've got a team of about 50 staff, and I've been asking my team leaders, what do you think about going back into the office to work when we can go back in? And one of the challenges is feeling safe using public transport, because most of my team use either bus or train to get to the office in Leeds to work. So one of those sort of key challenges is how safe do you feel? So, okay, we can move on to the next slide, please. And I think this is just bringing in terms of that commuting patterns again, in terms of the slides, a notable reduction in the 5 days a week commute or the regular commute observed in the long term. There's been plenty of this in the national press and national media in terms of people. It's often called hybrid, where people work from home more as well as working in the office. So really interesting to see how that will sort of roll out over the next few months and sort of what sort of long-term patterns are established. But as you can see, whereas before we might have been 5 days a week, that is going to change. And it's what does that change to? Is it that 4 day a week, or is it that 1 to 3 days a week? Really interesting, and none of us are really sure about how that will sort of evolve. Okay. So I think that just summarises that very nicely in terms, so far road use has recovered better than public transport and in West Yorkshire, and that's similar to what's happening nationally. And I think the other key thing to draw out here, working from home and shopping online are expected to remain more prevalent than before COVID. And that affects lots of other things. So that factor there in terms of the working from home and doing more things in terms of accessing services and being able to do your shopping online, that is going to change the way people do travel. And commuting journeys are expected to remain lower than pre-pandemic, with public transport users more inclined to reduce commuting journeys, especially by rail. So it's some real key challenges for us. And if you just think about rail for a minute, lots of people who also use buses to access. So it does have an impact there. So one of our busiest bus rail interchange hubs is Huddersfield, for instance, in terms of lots of people interchanging there between bus and trains. And similarly in Leeds, lots of people would be using the bus to make onward journeys in Leeds too. So we need to think about these things as we plan for the future. And from Transport Focus, who are a national organisation and undertake surveying and look at customer service, increased proportions say that have used public transport in the last week, which is good, and that's positive. And the majority do feel safe using it from their survey work. But not everyone is saying they feel as comfortable using trains and buses now as they did prior to the start of the pandemic. It's only 40%, that 2 out of 5. And that, again, that 40% won't use public transport unless social distancing is in place. I think that echoes some of the comments made in the conversation or the chat that we had about not feeling safe on trains and the issue about masking and that sort of face covering there. Okay. And if we could move on to the next one. So we've got some ways that we're addressing it. We mentioned the BSIP, the Bus Service Improvement Plan, and there is a network plan being developed as part of the BSIP work. We are doing more flexible ticketing and working with the bus operators to do that, and looking at the potential for a capped fare system similar to that you have in London, although London is funded in a different way. We are looking at an improved customer information. So we've rolled out recently in Leeds a network navigation project, which provides improved signage and information. And we're also looking at developing a passenger charter in partnership with the bus operators there. And bus priority is something that's key to delivering on reliable and fast bus journey times. And that's something that was given out to us in the guidance for BSIP. Government wants to see us invest more in bus priority and in ensuring that we have an efficient bus network. Okay. And there's some examples about M-Card and the mobile app we've rolled out, sort of carnet tickets that we're doing, sort of buying a block of 10 tickets and getting discounts. They save a ticket, and I can't quite see the bottom of my screen. I didn't know if I can do anything with that because I can't see the bottom of the slide there. But I know we're looking at doing other things and cheaper fares too. So if we could skip on to the next one there. Okay. And contactless ticketing, that's been really important. Rail's been really keen on pushing, I suppose, QR codes and barcodes. And again, the discounted season ticket products that the rail companies are now providing. We mean green campaign, and I'm not sure, there's been some really positive rail advertising about being able to reconnect. I quite like seeing the Avanti West Coast train advert with a tortoise sort of whizzing around on his roller skates, saying how easy it is to travel around. But LNER, Northern, they've all been promoting how you can reconnect with people and do things again using trains, and trains in terms of their environmental credentials, in terms of reducing congestion, the ability to free up space and reduce carbon emissions. It's a really positive message there. And the trains that we've got on the network, the new trains in particular, are more energy efficient than the older trains that they've replaced too. Okay. And active travel is another key part of the equation for us in terms of looking how we can promote walking and cycling and connect people up, particularly for local short distance trips. That's really important. And a lot of the work that the team are doing is looking at how we can make communities more connected, reducing the severance that major roads or arterial roads can cause. And it's really important to think it's not just about the traffic congestion, but it's about the air quality and pollution that causes too, in terms of road traffic. There's been lots, I'm sure you'll have seen the press about air quality in London and the first link between the deaf and the air quality there by someone living near the South Circular Road, how it had been a contributory factor. And so air quality is something we do need to think about and how we can improve that. I think the other thing to remember is that buses are probably the best in terms of road space utilisation and being a cleaner form of travel. So we do need to ensure that we're developing these schemes, that we do have a balanced approach and we enable public transport to work efficiently, so we can give people a real choice about making local journeys, using the right thing, making those right choices, whether it be walking, cycling, in terms of the active modes, or using public transport. And really, we don't want to make the car the first choice for short distance trips. We want to make those other modes the first choice for short distance trips. Okay. Yeah, and I think that's just saying that. And we need to work with communities to find out what is the best way to do that in terms of they're your local roads. What are the things that we should do that support your community, as opposed to saying what we think will work? So it's really come up with solutions that are locally focused and owned by the community, so they can be implemented in a good way. And it's really about how can we make the best of walking, cycling, and public transport there for local and short distance trips. Okay, and yep, when I saw this, it did make me smile in terms of cleaning capacity and that. I think buses have never been cleaner in terms of the cleaning that they get in trains too, in terms of the extra effort that bus and train companies have made in terms of fogging and cleaning and making sure they are safe environments to travel on. The bus occupancy, I've noticed that when I've been out to say your next bus has plenty of space on, or your next bus will be full. And similar with trains, they've been using occupancy or providing information too in terms of knowing when your busy trains are likely to be there, when you're more likely to have a seat as well. And that flexibility, or coming up with better flexible or more flexible ticketing products too. And really pleased to have Councillor Groves on today's call in terms of the under-19 fair deal for young people and how we've worked collaboratively to promote that and get that in this year. And that's been fantastic. So we are making changes, and we're working probably at a quicker pace than we probably would normally work at in terms of trying to get all these changes made. But it's a real period of not knowing or quite knowing what the next year or the next 2 years are going to bring. So back to those questions that we had at the start of it, and it's really up to you to sort of come in, and I'll let the chair sort of take it from here. How has COVID changed your travel habits and the perception of safety? What needs to happen to enable transport to support an economically sustainable recovery? How do we ensure transport options enable the widest range of people to be included in society? Thank you.
Thank you, Edwin. That's very comprehensive and a great start for the sharing of thoughts on this. Would anyone like to begin? Mark, I'll bring you in.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm using the bus less to the degree that I no longer am buying a monthly ticket. And I think it's because of, I mean, this meeting's an example. Before it was in person, I would have had a return trip into town and back. And I think it's that's sort of dictating the bus use rather than my personal choice. So I'm taking advantage of some remaining online facilities. I don't think I'm buying any more online than I was before. But I think it's just my physical movements in and out of Leeds.
Thank you, Mark. Howard, bring you in. I think, Howard, you're still on mute.
Thank you for that reminder. Yes, I'm certainly using public transport less, and I think that is on grounds of safety, with the lack of mask wearing, and I think also that still sectors of the population are still being vaccinated as well. And I suppose because I have an elderly relative that I'm a carer for. So I think that will change in time. I think it will come back as the number of cases hopefully reduce in the future. But I think we're not there yet, clearly. In terms of shopping, yes, I have bought more online, but I think there are some things that it's easier to buy online where you know exactly what you want. Like a new cartridge for your printer, you know exactly what you want. But I think there are other things where you do need to see what you're buying. So I think, again, people will go back to actually using proper shops, as it were, to some extent.
Thank you, Howard. Clive?
I'm much the same. I mean, there's not really been much to go into Leeds for. Meetings online, Entertainment is coming back. So I think the interesting one for me, living in the suburbs, is shopping locally. And it's public transport into Leeds works, but locally for short journeys, I use the car and add to the congestion, which is the problem. And so all the local, I think perhaps more people are shopping locally, but car parking has become a lot harder. And so public transport ought to be more attractive. But I think it comes down to bus priority. And if it was quicker for me to get to the shops locally and not have to worry about parking, and equally to go into Leeds or Harrogate or wherever, that would make the difference. And unfortunately, we have limited bus priority, and that has implications. I think we'd have a more frequent service. It's been a downward spiral, and in the last 20 years. So to get people out of their cars, I think car ownership has gone up, the deliveries have gone up. And I think the fact that from the report that Edwin gave, that road use is back or slightly above pre-COVID, I think is quite worrying. And bus priority is the main thing that is going to make people think, oh, I can get into Leeds quicker by bus than I can if I drive. If the bus is caught up with all the general traffic, that's a problem. And I mean, it comes to mind for me that our bus journeys have gone up before pre-COVID, in the last few years pre-COVID, have gone up by, the journey times have gone up by 30% in some cases. So, and if I'm driving, I can rat run, I can avoid Horsforth roundabouts. But the bus can't, because it can't take its journey. I know Transdev, using the ZAP Leeds to York route, have managed that to a degree, but we need bus priority in the suburbs. And I think that's really got to be a priority for the future if we're going to get more people out of their cars.
Thanks, Clive. And I think this is the point where we really watch with interest the outcome of the pilot for the flexibuses, and hope that those schemes can be run in other areas of Leeds as well where we need them. Thank you. Paul, did you want to come in on this point as well?
Yeah, so I don't know if I'm allowed to, but I will. I don't like sitting here saying nothing, but I think just, yeah, picking up a couple of comments that have gone through. I think I'm sure, like Clive, we'd love to have less congestion to deal with in his area. We sometimes think of congestion as being sort of city centre or anywhere, but places like Eden, Guiseley, Rawdon Crossroads, things like that. The pinch points out there that sometimes get a little bit overlooked in amongst bigger schemes. I think just a couple of points I was going to make on the presentation and the comments before. I think we should be slightly careful when we see that traffic journeys have returned to a similar to levels as to what they were before, and we shouldn't necessarily conflate that with traffic has come back as it was before, because I know when I'm able to pick my son up from school, there are plenty of people picking up at school who never used to pick up from school at 3:30. They'd stick the kids in breakfast club, but now they're working from home. They can nip out in the car and go and pick the kids up from school. So actually what they've done, we've got new and different car journeys and some of the old ones. So people can also pop to the shops. I must admit, I know when I was working from home, I took the advantage of nipping out and doing the shopping when it was quieter, when I could do it, when I wouldn't normally do it. Back in the office now, so back to normal in that respect. But yeah, there are different behaviours. So things may still change in that respect. But yes, you do find some slightly odd delays in the network that you wouldn't have before. And then perhaps the final thing is a bit of a positive. And this, there's been a couple of comments about safety and cleanliness. So there was two contradictory sort of viewpoints in the passenger focus work. One is that the people who won't travel unless there's social distancing and masks, and also the people who won't travel because there is social distancing and masks, which suggests at the moment we can't win either way. In that respect, there will always be a group for whom the arrangements don't work. We just have to reassure them that we are clean and safe. Now, back in May, as restrictions were starting to be peeled off, we decided to try and re-engage with some of the customers who had lapsed, who hadn't travelled with us since back in March 2020. So we sent everyone who was registered for our ticketing app a 3-day ticket for anywhere across our network, and then we've sort of kept that going for anybody who is a new sets up a new account since. And we've had some quite good take up of that. But actually, what's really been interesting is the amount of people who shared their journeys. So giving them a free pass, they come back and tell us where they've been and what their experience was like. And every single one of them thought it was better than they expected. They found it was clean. They felt safe. They felt comfortable. They felt happy. That's different areas, different times of the day. And actually, we aren't getting people coming to us and saying, I've just come back to using the bus and I found it awful. I found it unsafe. We just don't get that. We get people coming out. The first time I've been on the bus for 18 months, and I was so reassured that it's safe and clean, and it wasn't too busy. Although we've now back to full capacity. Buses aren't packed for most of the time. Yes, there are times at school times when they may be busy. So if it reassures people, those that are coming back are generally coming back happy and safe. And it's just making sure we make sure those messages get sort of circulated out there for those who are still nervous and anxious about it, and quite understandably, that others are out there trying it and coming back happy. So hopefully that reassures people going on. I think as Edwin said before, I think he pinched my line that buses have never been cleaner. The saying you should never waste a good crisis. We must make sure that the things we do with more and more in-service cleaning, sweeping buses out between trips, sanitising areas, things like that, stay on, and we learn from that, because that's been one of our successes. So we must take that as a legacy for our industry.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Howard, did you want to come back with?
Just on this issue of active travel, I was interested on the slides that there was a breakdown of the percentage of people that they would walk and cycle more between sort of recreational walking and cycling and I suppose utility, I think was the word used, purposes. And the percentage was much higher for recreational cycling and walking. And I think it's probably the first time I remember seeing a breakdown of cycling and walking in that way. I live in North Leeds, and I've see a lot more cyclists around than I used to do. But the peak day for cyclists is actually a Sunday. So I suppose it's been my observation that there's a lot of the growth in cycling has been for recreation. And I don't think we necessarily recognise that in how we target our investments in cycling infrastructure. I think it tends to be targeted more towards commuting. So I think there's an issue there to say, do we actually want to target it towards cycling infrastructure for commuting rather than recreational? Because perhaps if people cycle and walk for recreational purposes, that's the starting point, but they might later on then start to cycle and walk for other purposes.
Thanks, Howard. That's a really good point. And yeah, that's a good point too, Paul, about the cycle storage key points. I know that in a lot of our recent consultations, cycle storage has come up quite a lot, whether we're talking about parks, whether we're talking about other spaces. People have been very keen to ask about having safe cycle storage. Thanks, Howard. Leslie, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I noticed that the statistic that Howard noted, and I mean, in a way, it's almost points to trying to make it more attractive for the commuting cyclist rather than, you know, making special facilities for the leisure cyclist. I mean, the leisure cyclist is probably going to ride a bike anyway because that's what he or she enjoys doing. What we're trying to do is to substitute car journeys for bike journeys, and I think I was quite reassured by the figures because it did show that, you know, quite a substantial proportion of people intended to commute more on bikes, and certainly, I mean, the walking figure is good too. But I think what I'm saying is that don't give up on the urban cyclist. I mean, I've been one for 60 years now, and I mean, things have improved in Leeds, and they're improving all the time. But I think we must keep the pressure up to keep the improvements going, to encourage the mode shift. While I've got the floor, I'm just on the middle question. I think no matter how attractive we make the bus facilities and the trains, we're not going to get the modes to shift back unless we make life fairly unpleasant for the motorist, I'm afraid. I'm, as I say, use a bike all the time. I don't drive. I've noticed that not only have the roads got much more crowded, they seem to be used by people who don't actually drive as well as they used to either. Life is getting a bit unpleasant out there, frankly. You know, a level of traffic and a level of aggression on the road, which I really wasn't used to before. I don't know what we do about the aggression, but I think that in order to move things in the way we need to move, not necessarily for economic growth, but for sustainability, I think we're going to have to be fairly severe about allowing this growth of motor cars, however we do that. And you all know that there's a variety of ways of doing that. So I think it's a carrot and a stick thing. I think the carrot of having good, cheap buses and trains is one of it, but I think we're going to still need the stick.
Thank you for those points, Leslie. Very pertinent. Any other comments on the workshop questions? I think from the environmental side of things, I think having those tangible examples of, for example, how many cars are off the road to fill one carriage of a train, or how many trucks versus freight. I think those kind of examples work really well for people, because I think sometimes when you're thinking about the environmental side, you can't quite picture and envisage what kind of impact you might be having. But I think for rail and train, having those kind of tangible examples of how the environment impacts and how it might impact clean air and other environmental issues is really useful to have. Any other workshop comments? Howard, did you want to come back in? Your hand is...
Just one, I suppose, perhaps controversial thought about the third point. How do we ensure transport options enable the widest range of people to be included in society? I mean, I suppose what one challenge is, as I think Leslie was alluding to, is how do we get people out of their cars and using other modes of transport? And I suppose living in North Leeds, it's probably my observation that a lot of the bus improvement schemes seem to have been in the city centre, or I suppose we're talking about East Leeds and South Leeds. A lot of the schemes that were consulted on in North Leeds don't seem to have gone ahead yet. So I think that perhaps there is an issue about the need for schemes for bus priority in all parts of the city, not North Leeds included, if we're going to get people who are car owners out of their cars and onto public transport. So just a perhaps slightly controversial comment there.
Thanks, Howard. Clive, did you want to come back in?
Well, yes, I'd second what Howard's saying, because apart from the Kirkstall improvement, which was now 11 years ago, we've been asking for bus priority, well, since then, so that the improvements continue beyond Kirkstall Road and Horsforth. And the Horsforth roundabout expenditure a few years ago was an opportunity for that, but it didn't actually do anything. In fact, it made it worse. So bus priority, yes. I think the other thing, though, the point I was going to make was that the environmental impact in terms of pollution, air quality, we know that, but clearly the message isn't getting across to most people. So it's very convenient to get into your car, and most people don't think twice. And we don't seem to have a publicity campaign. I mean, if you're behind a bus, it doesn't say, at least I don't think I've seen it say, this bus could take 70 cars off the road. We don't see that. So we're not promoting good practice. And so perhaps it's not surprising that people don't do the right thing. We need to do more on that scale. Is it marketing? I don't know. But that's my thought.
Thank you for that.
Just giving a particular example, in North Leeds, the Harrogate Road corridor through Chapel Allerton to Moortown has 3 bus services, each of 10-minute frequency, but there haven't recently been any bus priority measures on that corridor. Just a very short bus lane in Moortown itself, which is of limited value because it's only in operation for a very short period during the day.
Thank you. Edwin, is there anything else you'd like to bring in to round off the workshop?
No, I just wanted to say thanks to everyone for their comments. It's really helpful to capture your thoughts on this and how we can improve things as we go into more of a recovery phase and move out of the pandemic. And so really helpful comments about, I think, the marketing and advertising, the need for bus priority, and also there's probably a need not just for those things, but education in terms of how do we get that message out to our communities in terms of what are the actual impacts of you choosing to use a car to make a journey, as opposed to considering what other things there. And I think, I can't remember who said it about that stick and carrot. So we do need to incentivise the use of active and public transport in some way, in terms of how can we say that you are choosing to do the right thing and it isn't that so expensive as well. So I think some really interesting and good points that have been made, and hopefully they've all been captured by our team there who are recording the meeting. So we've got those captured as things to feed back in terms of the work we're doing. So you'll be pleased to know that yours is the first meeting for the districts, and there are other meetings with the other 4 districts later this week. And I think perhaps one is next week. But just really appreciate that you've all given your time this afternoon to help us, really. So really appreciate that. And thanks very much, Councillor Cunningham.
Thank you. Well, thank you everyone for attending, and thank you Edwin and team for your help and support both before the meeting and throughout the meeting. I appreciate it, and I appreciate the input, and very nice to meet everyone. So thank you. With that, we'll close the meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you everyone.